Today we celebrate the feast of Saints Thomas More and John Fisher. Thomas More was the Chancellor of England under Henry VIII, a Renaissance man who was friends with Erasmus and philosophers and thinkers throughout Europe. Very cultured man, wrote Utopia, which was kind of a treatise on the ideal political state. Also devoutly Catholic. He was married, he had children, lived in this stately home on the River Thames, was friends with Henry VIII when they were both young, and he ends up becoming Chancellor, the second most powerful man in the kingdom. If you've watched A Man for All Seasons, you're familiar with the narrative. Thomas ends up resigning his position because he cannot agree with the king's position regarding the divorce of Catherine of Aragon, and then ultimately Henry making himself head of the church and essentially renouncing Roman Catholicism. Henry doesn't comment on it publicly. He resigns his position. He simply wants to remain quiet and out of the scene. Henry demands that Thomas More publicly support him, which in conscience he cannot do. Ends up going to the Tower of London and is tried and ultimately executed on this day. And it was in the Tower that his daughter Margaret came to him and pleaded with him just to sign the paper that would acknowledge that the king was the head of the church. You sign the paper and cross your fingers behind your back. Tell God you don't really mean it. We don't want to lose you, Father. And Thomas said, I can't do that. My conscience doesn't allow me to do that. So he went to his death saying, I die the king's good servant, but God's servant first. And he reminds us that throughout history, we honor the martyrs because they were willing to give up their lives rather than their faith. They're willing to say that there's a principle here on which to stand. And in conscience, I cannot violate that principle, even if it means that it's going to cost my life. John Fisher was the only bishop in England who did not comply with what the king was doing. And he too was beheaded and suffered the role of being a martyr. And so we honor them together because here are these two prophetic voices of truth. One, a bishop, one, a layman, both powerful in their own right, cultured, educated, willing to serve the king, God, and country, but in the end, God always first. Reminds us, for us, here in the United States in the 21st century, we're Catholics first, we're Americans second, perhaps we're members of a particular party third. We can never get those sequences switched. It always has to be that we're Catholics first before everything, and that our Catholicism informs and forms everything else about us.